Good morning. I'm John Pettit. I am CTO at Relay Media, and we're a company that converts existing sites to AMP. And when Paul asked me to do this, we sort of talked about what to talk about, and it was sort of 16 random things we learned converting millions of AMP pages. And I think to start with, I want to talk a little bit about why we convert existing sites. Part of it is really the basic programming principle of don't repeat yourself. You've built a site, you've built a responsive site, it works, don't build another one. We said, why don't we just take the existing responsive layout you've got and make it AMP? And that should be easy enough, really, shouldn't it? We do that for a number of companies, some of which you've heard of, and there's a bunch of them here. And we take their existing site without a new template, without going through and having to get the designers involved again, and without having to have a whole engineering effort. From a publisher standpoint, you put one tag on the page and we do the rest. And we convert about 1 million distinct articles a day to AMP from existing. And the average article starts off with 440K of CSS on it, and I'll talk a lot more about that later. We get that down to 31K. Takes us about 600 milliseconds to convert an article from cold. And so we're really doing it in real time, producing quality AMP pages. We call them high-fidelity AMP pages. We think you shouldn't build an AMP page that only works on mobile. It should be responsive. If you'd load it on a desktop, it should work. Flipboard is currently serving a lot of AMP pages to iPads. So if you've built your AMP page for an iPhone-only size, it's not going to look as great on an iPad. You really need to think about AMP now as a all resolutions format. And this talk really is about what we learned along the way, what the gotchas are. And I think the first thing to say is that HTML to AMP HTML is kind of easy, mostly. There's open source platforms to do it. There's a number of decent Node modules that'll do a lot of the lifting for it. So I'm not really going to spend a lot of time talking about the HTML, although I will talk about some of the edge cases on it. What I will spend some time talking about is the hard part, which is the CSS, and some of the real issues of how do you get that 440K of CSS down to 31K. Yeah, really, it's a little daunting. We've actually seen sites with as much as 800K of CSS. Scary. This is what has people bail and do a new template, get a new designer. Problem with that is that any typical development shop, you have a list of 20 things to do, and only the top 2 are ever going to get done, because things get pushed in the list all the time, and AMP is generally not one of the top 2 for most people. So, what do you do? Well, first problem is CSS is kind of like that storage unit that people's in-laws have. You know, it's the one where you kind of open it and shove stuff in and shut it really quick and hope nothing broke. Nobody ever takes anything out of CSS because you don't know what template's using it. You know, you've got templates all over your site, obscure stuff. You really don't know what's going to break when you take something out of your CSS. And a quick survey, how many people actually know what everything in their production CSS does? I think 1 hand at the back, 2 hands at the back. Yeah, I rest my case. I think part of this is we've all been given this model of one big CSS file, and really it's a bad idea. It sounded good. We'll build this one big CSS file, everybody will cache it, the world will, you know, everything will load really quickly once we've got that there. It'll be the same for every page. It's rubbish. It's not a good idea. There's several reasons why it's not a good idea. One is that most people are 1, 2, 3, 4 pages and done. And those 4 pages are typically the same template. And so they're really not using the vast majority of your CSS on your site. The other thing is people don't take things out of it. There are sites we've seen, and I won't name them, but that still have the CSS for their Olympics coverage and their 2016 election coverage in their site, and older things than that. The other thing is your one big file doesn't actually get cached. It might on the desktop where there's lots of space, but when you put it on a phone, it doesn't get cached that much. It gets flushed out of cache. Some people even put cache busters on their CSS and change it every day, so it really doesn't get cached. So it's just not a good way to do CSS. You should really be doing per page CSS. And I'm going to talk about how to do that for AMP. So what you do is you filter all the CSS and, and include the rules you use. Sounds easy enough, really, doesn't it? And if you do it simplistically, it actually is relatively easy. There's some gotchas, but it's really slow. Basically, you get your AMP page, you get your CSS file, you run every selector against your AMP page, and you see which ones hit things, and you include those. And if you can spend 300 or 400 milliseconds a page to do that, then great. We can't. So we figured out how to do that a little bit faster, actually a lot faster than that. And the first thing to know is that it really doesn't matter what matches the CSS rule. It just matters that something does, or more importantly, that nothing does, because you want to throw the rule away. All right? So you don't care if whether there's 5 .foos or 20 .foos on the page, or where the .foo is on the page. You just care, is there a .foo? So the first thing you're going to do here is you go through and you find all the things. So the trick is walk the DOM once. You go through the DOM. We happen to use Cheerio and Node on the server side. You go through the DOM once. You collect all the IDs. You collect all the classes. You collect all the element names. And you store them someplace you can find them fast. We really like ES6 sets. They're a lot faster than using objects as hashes, just as an aside if you're a JavaScript type person. And so once you've done this, you've got this big list of all the things that are used on the page. And the next thing you do is you go through your CSS file and you break up all of the selector chains into their individual elements. So you take the .foo and you look in your big list of things and you go, is .foo in the list? And it's not. You can throw that away. You don't even have to look at the rest of the rule. You go through that, and for each block of CSS, if you find you've thrown all of the selectors away, then you can throw the block of CSS away. We see, I mean, we've got customers with 5,000 CSS rules, and maybe 400 of them are used on a page, on a busy page. A lot of times it's near as 300. So we throw a lot of stuff away. This is definitely the faster way. It's 10 times faster than trying to run every selector with a jQuery-like query against it. Huge performance win doing that. It's still too big. You rename all the things. People get wordy with their classes, and that's really nice when you're actually trying to maintain code and figure out what things do, but it's not nice when you need to get it under 50K. So we go through and we rename all the classes, we rename all the IDs, and there's an interesting gotcha in this one because we did the classic thing of you start off with AA, AB, AC, AD, and then you find your page breaks. And the reason your page breaks is because somebody's ad blocker saw the class that you'd renamed as .ad was an ad and deleted it. So you don't start things with A. The other reason is you don't want to end up with something that starts .amp because then the AMP runtime will get petulant and object to it as well. So you have to be a little careful about how you rename the things. And then you find that some developer's done something clever and is starting to use an attribute selector with a prefix on the class field in order to try and match their icon class and do something to all their icons. So you have to sort of watch for those and not rename them. And it gets there's a few edge cases in there, but it works. So then what happens? Well, you come to important. And I really want to know who named this not important. It always bugs me. Bang important, not important. Don't know. So AMP doesn't let you have bang important in your CSS. So how do you convert this? Well, if you start thinking about how CSS works, it's a precedence hierarchy. So you've got elements, classes, IDs, CSS actually on the element level CSS, and then essentially bang important is another column off beyond that. So your dot widget, your classic dot widget, if you sort of pretend this is decimal for a moment, is a precedence 10. Well, if you stick a couple of IDs in front of it, you can make that precedence 210, pretending this is decimal. and raise its precedence a lot. And so you could sort of fake .important. And the nice thing about that with two IDs is that you can put one of them on the HTML and one of them on the body. So they're global for the page. So now you've got to do is fish out all the important things, put them in a set of rules at the bottom, prefixed by the two IDs you put on the body and the HTML, and magically they have the precedence, and they behave like they were bang important, even without having bang important. So the AMP runtime is happy. Yeah, it took a while to figure that one out, but it's a nice hack. So enough CSS stuff for a second. Edge cases. Iframes. I like iframes. People taught them about duct tape, and anybody who's seen Mythbusters know you can do an awful lot of stuff with duct tape. You can make boats with duct tape, airplanes with duct tape. We iframe a lot of things, and some of that is stuff that originally started as a regular iframe. There are lots of things that get embedded on pages that are iframes that can just be an AMP iframe because they can be HTTPS, but they don't actually admit they can be HTTPS. So you have to go and see, does this really work if you turn it into an HTTPS URL? And we have a whitelist we've maintained, and there's some examples here. Storify and Survey Gizmo and a bunch of other stuff, C-spans, embeds, and so on. We also, in our converter, log every iframe we find that we can't convert, and it spits out a report, and then I go and have a look and see, can we fix this one later? So iframes, so that's the first line of attack for most things. But then, what do you do for the stuff that's a JavaScript embed? And the answer is really to shim it. In a mechanical engineering world, a shim is a small piece that you put in to make two parts fit together. I come from a mechanical engineering world back in the day. Good example, discuss comments. So the discuss comments plugin, the way it normally works, is there's a lump of JavaScript you put on the page. It adds an iframe element to the page. The iframe loads the comments, and it sends a message up to its parent JavaScript that says, hey, I want to be this long. And it gets resized, and there's your comments on the page. What we did, and Discuss have some sample code on their site to do this, and it's not quite robust enough, so we rewrote it, is build a shim frame. And the shim frame has the Discuss comments in it. We pass into it the parameters of which site and which page and all the things that Discuss needs to build the right comments. Run their JavaScript, listen for their resize messages, and then send AMP the AMP resize iframe message to get AMP to resize the iframe the size we want. And this comments are at the bottom of the page typically, so they resize before the user ever gets there. So it works pretty well. Two things to really watch with that. One is every iframe you put on the page, you should have a placeholder element. Natalia talked yesterday from The Guardian about breaking a page because somebody put an iframe within 600 pixels at the top. The whole 600 pixel thing is silly. It's silly because you as a developer have no way of knowing what size screen somebody's looking at, what orientation it's in. What is 600 pixels from the top of this page? You don't know. If 600 pixels on an iPhone 5 and 600 pixels on an iPad Pro are very different animals. So you should be putting a placeholder on every iframe that you're putting on an AMP page. The good news is the placeholder doesn't actually need to have anything in it. It can be an empty div with a tag that says placeholder, and that keeps the runtime happy and it all works. So that's what we do. The other thing is you need the overflow element, because if the user does scroll to the comments really fast, it won't have resized. AMP will have got petulant with you and not resized it, and so you have to push the button to make this bigger thing. The code for this, there's a link here, and I'll put the slides up on SlideShare, and you can go and play with the code, and feel free to grab it and do things if you want to. A few other things we learned. AMPList, it's not just for lists. So we're using AMPList for all sorts of interesting things. This one is KOB. It's one of the Hubbard television broadcast stations. It's the weather widget. And you don't really want to cache the weather. It doesn't do well it doesn't age well in the cache, shall we say. So we build the weather widget with an AMPList. And it's not a particularly complicated piece of code. The only gotcha we do is that we proxy their API to HTTPS so that we can return the JSON HTTPS again to keep AMP happy on that. But other than that, it's a very simple use of AMPList, and it works really well. We do the same thing. This is, did we go two slides? No, we didn't. One slide. This is from TMZ, and this is their comment count. So the comment count is dynamic on TMZ's pages, and we do the same thing. It's not a list. It's just a single element that we're AJAXing in with AMPList. You can use it all sorts of ways like this. Highly recommended. So you've built this page. It looks great. How are you going to make any money out of this thing? And excuse the corny title. We've looked. This is one of the places where we actually deviate from people's standard layouts. And one of the reasons we did that is because what we found is a lot of people who build a responsive site, they put the ads in the right rail. And then when the site folds to mobile, the ads fold underneath, and nobody sees them. They're at the bottom of the page. They're below the article content. And they're really not optimized. And if your ad sales team and your design team are not really thinking about mobile layouts versus desktop layouts, when they build a responsive, you end up with the ads not being seen. So we built an engine that dynamically inserts ads, and we can do things like count paragraphs or count words and put the ads in the content stream. We found a 300 by 250 after paragraph 2 is about the optimal place to put the first ad. And then we'll put an ad every n paragraphs, and according to publisher taste, and that's sort of typically every 3 to 4 paragraphs. And you have to put something in that says, okay, what is a paragraph? Because otherwise you find they do a list, and you have 3 sentences, 3-word sentences, and you have an ad between every one, and that doesn't work. So you have to have a minimum word count on your paragraphs to make that work properly. Once you've done that, you can actually get to a pretty good ad yield, pretty good model. One of the things we found, though, is the users don't actually scroll to the bottom of the page. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, about how we measured it. But it is really important to have the ads in the content if you want them seen. The other thing I'd say is, don't just do DFP to AdX. A lot of the people who came early in the AMP world started off by, we'll get this simple AMP template, and we'll just throw some AdX ads on and see what it does. And then they complained they didn't make any revenue. And a lot of people have talked about this over the last day or so. You really need to look at all the ad products you're using on your production site and say, is there an AMP equivalent? How can we maximize the revenue? We were very early on with Nativo and Teads in-stream. There's a Teads in-stream video in the clip there. We just put Kixer on some pages. We have people using alternate exchanges. You really got to look at all your ad products, and you've got to keep looking at it. It's something you put on a calendar for every month, like what new things are in AMP this month for advertising that weren't there last month that we should be looking at and including in our pages, because it is really a very rapidly evolving ecosystem. Video pre-roll. There's a reason that almost nobody uses the AMP video tag, and that reason is it doesn't support pre-roll. And pre-roll is a really nice high CPM, high value thing, whether you like it or not. Particularly as a user, I don't like it. As somebody who deals with making money out of web pages, I love it. And so we end up iframing everybody's video player in to make it do the pre-roll properly. And I think it's one of the critical things you have to look at and make sure that works. And then including direct sold inventory, particularly in the local markets that we serve. A lot of our customers are television station networks. The direct sold inventory is a much higher value inventory than the programmatic. And it's really important to make sure that that's targeting the AMP pages, because as AMP becomes a higher and higher part of the overall page traffic, you really want to keep that revenue up. So, experiments. We love AMP experiment. We use this for a whole bunch of things. We actually use it for splitting up ads. So we'll do things like 80% of the ads are one set of ads, and 20% of the ads are another set of ads, and we'll use AMP experiment to manage that. A couple of experiments I want to talk about that we did that had interesting outcomes. One, there's this tag, data loading strategy, prefer viewability over views. How many people have actually seen that in the AMP ad spec? Anybody? So what that does is AMP, when you look at a page, it doesn't load the ad until it gets within 2.5 viewports of where the user is. So the ads are lazy loaded. And if you set this flag, it doesn't load the ad until it's within 1.25 viewports of where the user is. And the idea is that your viewability on your ads will jump. You get a much higher viewability if you don't load them until the user's about to see them. And the theory there being that you'll make a higher CPM because the ad is more viewable. And that is actually true. You do make a higher CPM because the ad's more viewable. We ran a large-scale test over 25 sites for a month or so doing this. And I would say, if you're going to do tests with ads, you really need to run longer-term tests. One of the things we found is that the programmatic exchanges can take up to 2 weeks to figure out that something changed to actually optimize the yield curve on it. What we found is, yes, having more viewability on this really does improve the CPM, and it does it quite significantly, but the number of views drops such that the overall revenue was still down about 10%. So we went back to the regular thing. It's not quite there yet. I think if the ad networks can start really passing on that viewability signal to the buy side a little better than perhaps it is right now, that may change, because who wants to buy an ad that you can't see? But right now, that isn't passed through, and I think part of the reason that isn't passed through is because there's an awful lot of people buying ads that can't be seen. So, yeah, right now, not there. The other one we tried was AMP sticky ad versus having the 320 by 50 top banner. And what we found with that, you don't like the top banner as a design element. It's kind of messy having an ad. It gets in the way of your branding on your page. So we thought, well, maybe we can get rid of this and put the adhesion unit at the bottom and make it work. Didn't work from a revenue standpoint. A lot of that was because the initial implementation of the adhesion unit, it doesn't come up on the AMP page until you've scrolled quite a long way. There's a ticket open, I'm not actually sure where that is in the process, but there is actually a ticket open where Google's going to change that so that it comes up as soon as the page is scrolled at all, which will help, but it still didn't quite make the difference. The other one, which I'm not going to sort of name the guilty, but we track how far people scroll on the page. AMP Analytics has viewability triggers. And so you can put an AMP Analytics viewability trigger on any AMP element on the page to see if it came into view. So if you put one of those on something at the bottom of the article text, you could tell whether the user got to the bottom of the article text, which is nice. And then you can put one further down and see if the user got to the bottom of the page. There are elements that are major roadblocks to people reading, and people have been conditioned that when they see this element at the bottom of the text, they stop reading. And I'll leave it as an exercise for you to figure out who those are and what's in them. You can probably work it out. A few other things we've learned. This is not strictly an AMP thing, but it is an important thing. It's the structured data. People really haven't paid enough attention to their structured data. You'll see some logos here. The top two are sites that we handle, and we've done the AMP logo. We've made a nice job of it. One of the things that we noticed early on, the spec for the logo is 60 by 600 pixels, and if you give that to a designer and don't tell them the rest of the story, you get a bad outcome. And the rest of the story is that Google will render it 16 pixels high by 160 wide. So you actually have to design it to work at 16 pixels high. And so if you look at the one at the bottom there, which is the Seattle Post-Intelligence, I think, I can barely read it, it's a much harder to read element. Similar one, don't just use your masthead logo. WSB-TV in Atlanta is one of our stations we work with, and initially that was their masthead logo as the top one there, you can see, and it really isn't readable at the size you put it on it shows up in the carousel. Redesigned it, made it much easier to read. It's worth taking the time to make a special logo for AMP that reads at that resolution. It really gets your branding much stronger in the carousel, will increase your carousel clicks. And since the talk is the good, the bad, and the ugly, we'll give you that one. I actually didn't know where this was. Somebody told me it's an Atlanta station. It's an NBC station, I think, and it's 11, but I still have no idea whose it is. This is not how you do a logo. A few other things we've learned. I said it is really 16 random things we learned about AMP. AMP in a hurricane. What's he talking about, AMP in a hurricane? Well, I said we handle a lot of television networks. Two of those, Hearst Broadcasting and Cox, both have very strong presence in Florida. And Hurricane Matthew came along. And we saw some really interesting effects with AMP traffic. And it comes down to this. If you're sitting in the hurricane shelter or you're trying to get out in your car or the power's out and there's a big news event, you look at your phone and you search. And yeah, Google says there's no ranking signal for AMP. But if you weren't AMP, you weren't getting this traffic because people were hitting the things in the carousel at the top of the page. This is a graph that my co-founder Bob did. And the bottom blue represents all sites. We see typically between 15 to 20% of mobile article traffic is AMP right now. That's all sources, not just Google referrals. And it's articles, not navigation pages and home pages and things. It's actual article pages. During the hurricane for the southeast United States, the averages there got as high as 40%, and there were spikes into the 60%. So 60% of their mobile article traffic was AMP at that point. And we saw similar effects with the Oroville Dam emergency in California. We have the SAC-B and one of the Sacramento television stations are on our network. And very similar effects where, if something big happens, phone is the place people go first. AMP is the thing they see first. And so it's really important that you're in AMP, you're in the carousel, that your structured data is good, that your logo's good, all of those things. A few parting thoughts. You don't do AMP and leave it. It is not something that you just do. We've seen people do that. Keeping up with AMP is very much a full-time job. I looked in my AMP GitHub email folder, and there are like 35,000 emails in there. It's totally a moving target. This is a good thing. It's evolving very fast. You've heard a lot about this over the last day or so. But it does mean you have to keep up with it, and you have to have somebody doing it full-time. And we do that for our customers. If you're going to do it in-house, you have to have somebody doing it. Please validate every page. We do that. We validate. We generate 1 million pages a day. We validate them. It takes. I've got basically 2 machines, two CPU cores dedicated to doing it. It's not a huge amount of work. I'm running Node on that. Today, Cloudflare announced they've got an API you can call to validate your pages. There's no excuse for having invalid AMP pages. You don't have to validate them in line. We render a page, serve it, and then queue it up to be validated, because if it didn't validate, it wasn't going to get seen anyway. So either way, it doesn't really matter what order we do it in. We just want to know if it failed. Our fails, I see about 50 validation fails a day. Of those, the vast majority are the canonical page was severely broken and didn't render. And so you just go back and you're like, okay, this is garbage in, garbage out. Don't worry about it. The rest are some journalist put something on a page that we haven't seen before and broke it in some creative way. And then we go in and we collect those up and figure out how to fix them. So that's random things we've learned, converting millions of AMP pages. Thank you.